I have a question for you. Do you know an embedded finance use case involving horses? I didn't until now, when I learned about Equine MediRecord. The Irish software company enables horse owners around the world to manage medical data, treatments, and more for their horses. Co-founder Finlay Dargan realized the vast majority of horses globally have no insurance at all, often because it's difficult to obtain and expensive. This creates significant financial risk for owners. So he partnered with insurance technology provider Kayna and broker WTW to launch an embedded mortality insurance solution starting with the UK market. In this episode, I speak with Finlay from Equine MediRecord, Paul from Kayna, and Anthony from WTW. Together, they give us a complete picture, from identifying the opportunity to building the technology and bringing it to market. You'll hear how they created an insurance product that fits seamlessly into the horse owner's existing workflow and what this reveals about embedded insurance opportunities in unexpected markets. But before we dive in, a quick word from this episode's sponsor, Marqeta. When it comes to your card program provider, you can't afford to compromise. Marqeta's modern payment solution flex with your business without the trade-offs. Stable and agile, secure and innovative, scalable and configurable. If somebody tells you you can't have it all, don't believe them. Your business and your customers expect more. Choose a partner that delivers more. Choose Marqeta. Learn more at marqeta.com/Lars. And now, let's dive in. Hi, Finlay. Hi, Anthony. Hi, Paul. Welcome to the podcast. Today is one of the first editions where I'm going to have 3 guests. Looking forward to dive into the specific topic of embedded insurance and the specific sector of horses. For those of you who have listened to one of my previous podcasts, I learned quite a bit about jewelry, where my father-in-law is active in. My daughter is still too young to be excited about horses, but maybe that happens at one point as well, and I'm going to get some insights here. So, Finlay, I guess you are the person here with the biggest horse knowledge of all of us, right?
I presume that's the case, given your introduction, yes.
Perfect, Finlay. Maybe you want to kick us off. Obviously, you mentioned it's embedded insurance. It's in the broad sector of horses. Maybe before talking about the specific insurance case, maybe you can give us a little bit of introduction about what your company does, and then we can soon after that go more deeper onto the embedded insurance case.
Yeah. So my name's Finlay Dargan. I'm the COO of Equine MediRecord. And essentially this came out of, I come from 5 generations plus of horse breeders in Ireland. And just on our own farm, keeping up with all of the paperwork that generates, increasing regulation, it became increasingly difficult. And therefore, it was a brainchild of myself, my brother, Pierce Dargan, and our tech partner, Simon Hillary. We came up with this idea that why can't a lot of this paperwork just be digitized? And so the digital revolution came very late to a lot of the agricultural sector. So we started building out how can we digitize some of the paperwork aspects of the horse racing industry in particular. So we primarily focused on medical records. And now that we've grown around the world, the next step was, well, we're sitting on this pile of data. How can we help customers to improve other parts of their life where there's complications with paperwork? And that naturally led us to think, well, we're sitting on an awful lot of health data, an awful lot of horse data. Surely this could be of interest to insurers. We can help the horse racing industry, which faces huge problems of underinsurance, non-insurance in the horse sector. And so we started to seek out partners to help us to bring some digitization to the equine insurance sector. And that brought us into contact with Paul Prendergast and eventually with Anthony and WTW.
Exactly. And exactly with the 3 people here in front of me, the full value chain of this offering, from the front end to the person who is using it at the end of the software up to the whole insurance stack. But maybe, Finlay, just for us to understand fully, you have now recently launched the insurance offering. Can you describe the offering with a few more details without the insurance offering? Like what is your customers are doing with Equine MediRecord before?
So it differs country to country, obviously, but most of the world now, if you are taking care of a horse, you have to keep up-to-date medical records. This includes vaccination information. This includes medical information of any medications, treatments that you're giving your horses. So what we do is we provide a digital platform that is fully compliant with regulation that was previously entirely paper-based. So for legal reasons, you could only keep your horse's medical records on paper. And then, so the first step of our company was we had to sort out the tech piece, but a lot of it was going to the various regulators, and some of them had to change legislation to allow for a digital record. So our base customers, what they do is they use our system to keep track of their medications, their vaccinations. We send them vaccination updates. They can keep a whole range of notes on the system. So it's trying to eliminate as much as possible the regulatory paperwork in the horse racing industry.
Understood. And those people who are using it, are they typically individuals who own like one horse, or is it more like, as you know, you realize I have very little knowledge about this space. It's like sports club who have like a lot of horses. Like how's the industry?
So we have customers who have one or two horses on the system, but a large amount of our customers are large trainers. And so the horses that typically have the most paperwork and the most regulation are horses involved in horse racing, because obviously there's a huge integrity piece around keeping the sport fair and also an increasing focus on equine welfare. So the most heavily regulated horses from a health perspective tend to be those involved in horse racing. So most of our customers are big horse trainers. We have a large amount of yards of up to 30 horses, but we also have a significant number of, can have between say 200 and 400 horses in training. That would be the bulk of our customers. We have a number of owners and breeders, but the bulk of our customers are horse trainers who face stiffer regulatory hurdles.
Understood. And then maybe coming to Paul, I think, Paul, if I describe your position correctly, it's a layer in between what Finlay and like Anthony does. How much did you learn about horses in the last couple of months? Or was it an industry you were pretty aware already?
No, not terribly. Even though I live in the countryside in the south of Ireland, I would be, a lot of neighbours are involved in horses, so it's very much a passing interest. So I think when we started talking to Finlay, I thought it was very interesting. When it comes to embedded insurance, we started kind of first, we assumed most of our embedded insurance programs would be really simple, low cost, high volume. That was the theory. What has actually happened is there's been lots of very interesting, more complex insurance going live and embedded. And I think the reason is pretty obvious now, but in hindsight, it probably wasn't, was that there's lots of interesting data on these platforms. They've got a very unique distribution model. So you get access to a very specific group, whether it's, we work across lots and lots of different industries. And equine is fascinating. So you've got lots of very strong community, lots of great data, and you're able to improve that insurance experience. So what we always say to platform owners is our job working with our partners like WTW is to build an insurance experience that you can't get off platform. And platform owners typically want to solve problems for their customer base, and they want to build a really holistic solution. Insurance is one of the things that's really important for platform owners when they're dealing with customers. Obviously, it's not the only thing, but it's a key part of the overall solution, obviously driving through new revenue, etc. So yeah, I know way more about horses and horse insurance now than I ever thought I would, but it's a really interesting sector. Obviously in Ireland, it's massive, but Finlay and Pierce have built a global business out of Ireland, which is phenomenal. And we're just thrilled to be involved and with Anthony and the team at Markel. So very exciting, unusual embedded program. And that's what we find. There's so many different software platforms out there. That's what we find is really interesting about embedded. It can be so wide.
Yeah, that's what I keep joking about as well. I compared sometimes like working in embedded finance with being a student in business administration or like in generally in university back in the days when people choose consulting, because I said I don't have to make a choice about any industry. I just go into consulting and can decide later which industry I focus on. In a way, with embedded finance, you also have the luxury of like today it's jewelry, tomorrow it's equine, it's horses.
It's very varied. We always say that we're an inch deep and a mile wide. That's our business model that we almost mirroring our partner WTW. They could pretty much insure anything. Our job is to be that digital layer between the platform and the incumbent insurer and broker.
But just to understand a little bit better, Paul, like what are the kind of companies? Is Equine MediRecord like a very common kind of customer or partner you would be working with? Is it more like other type of companies that you rather strongly focus on?
So we typically partner with vertical SaaS, so software platforms that are very focused on a vertical. Obviously, Finlay and Pierce are focused on the equine health sector. We're working with people in, retail gas stations in the US. We're working in construction, in field services. So typically it can be incredibly wide. We look at platforms where there's lots of small businesses. As we all know, small business sector, there's massive issues. If you take the US, 40% have no insurance. Same in the UK, big protection gap, huge underinsurance. And the frightening term that we hear all the time is unknowingly underinsured. So platforms have a really strong role to play to get rid of the protection gap and underinsurance. And the whole insurance industry really is working to try to improve that. And I think going through platforms where you've got unique distribution, but lots of really interesting data, that's a fascinating new initiative. As a small startup, we're getting huge support from fourth biggest broker in the world. We're obviously a small startup, so that's huge credence to this particular initiative. So I think it's going to become pretty standard, embedded insurance. We always say, I know this is an embedded finance and fintech typically audience, we're about 3 or 4 years behind of embedded fintech. All the challenges that embedded fintech players had 3-4 years ago, embedded insurance folks like us and WTW are facing now, but all the Lego blocks are being put in place. So all the volume is coming down the track, but we're just years behind our fintech brethren.
That's what I sent as well. I mean, regular listeners will know that I'm not like so strongly focused on the insurance sector, but I remember also back in my open banking days when fintech just started, it was a common saying that like maybe banks and financial services not so advanced, but typically insurance is a few years behind that.
But that's where the opportunity is, for sure.
It might be to benefit, right? Can learn a bit and then look at the other sides to learn a bit. Let's move in the value chain to Anthony. We heard already WTW is basically the broker behind Kayna. So we have Equine MediRecord, where the owner of the racehorse is managing the medical records of the horse or their horses. Then obviously Kayna allows the technical embedding of an insurance product. And basically the insurance connection is then coming from WTW. Anthony, how would you in your own words describe your role in that partnership?
Well, first of all, my role and my team's role is basically managing our Affinity practice here in the UK. Now, for those that don't sort of refer or reference the term, Affinity insurance is a very well-established distribution method. And it's effectively the introduction or the distribution of insurance via organisations whose core activity isn't insurance. So in this case, our esteemed partners at Equine MediRecord. So we work in a way that delivers tailored insurance solutions. And that's for either membership groups, as Paul mentioned earlier on, vertical SaaS, marketplace organizations, retailers, manufacturers, and the list goes on. And I think what's exciting about how the world or the marketplace in terms of embedded insurance is moving, it's addressing a couple of things that the traditional channels don't. So if you imagine that a consumer is looking for insurance and they're left with the opportunity to go to a broker. That might be online, typically these days for general insurance or specialty insurance products. They will actually go through a proposal form and they'll insert all of the data that they need to. They'll get a quote, and hopefully if it's competitive and it's offering the right product for fair value, they'll make that connection and take that insurance out. Now, the challenge with that model is that it's incumbent on that, as Paul mentioned earlier on, that micro SME or that consumer to actually knowingly have the right data and information to hand at the right time. And that can be time consuming. For Finlay's customers, that could be time consuming. There could be trainers, there could be owners, and they don't have a playbook necessarily relating to insurance. They're not experts like us. So the technology that we work with in terms of Kayna's data integration layer that sits between WTW's insurance distribution capability and a client's site such as Finlay's, that gives us the opportunity to make the process a whole lot simpler for the customer. And also taking, where possible, data points that a vertical SaaS or a marketplace might have on an insurance proposer and support them to input the right data into the proposal forms. And you can argue that in future, and it's not a distant future, that we can even flag to consumers and potentially small businesses that do insure in through an embedded process, that their risk profile may have changed during a policy year, which actually supports the notion of solving a big issue with underinsurance, particularly in the, as Paul mentioned, the SME sector. The Chartered Institute of Loss Adjusters, I think the stat was from 2024, suggested that as many as 43% of insurance claims involve underinsurance, and that's specific to small businesses in the UK. So we can take embedded insurance, the technology and the data that exists in these vertical SaaS platforms, and actually create a better experience to buy insurance, but also to maintain the right cover in future.
Understood. And in this partnership with Equine MediRecord and Kayna, is it like a common traditional, let's say a normal kind of project for you, or what's in your team the usual kind of partnership that you're doing?
I mean, we love these projects because, as I said, they do two things. They make, potentially, if you get it right, they make products and insurance protection available at the right time, more appropriately, more tailored to a specific group of customers. And they make the process and the journey easier and more convenient. They add value and create and hopefully engender loyalty between the consumer and the organization, such as the SaaS provider, because that's, for Finlay, adding a greater level of service to customers. But for us as a large insurance broker, we have our traditional technology that facilitates customer experience, policy administration. But we work with organizations like Kayna because Kayna has the more nimble capability of actually connecting the dots in the value chain.
Understood. And from what I understood is the partnership between WTW and Kayna was already in place before Equine MediRecord approached you, right?
Yes, and we're working together predominantly on both sides of the Atlantic already with other exciting opportunities and programs.
Interesting. And Finlay, coming to you again, I mean, obviously in my podcast very often I speak with these like non-financial brands, the companies who are looking for embedding financial services or in this case, insurance product. And Anthony also touched a little bit on how your customers would probably source their insurances in case there wasn't really an embedded solution available in the software they're using. Can you maybe explain a little bit more in detail? Did your customers previously went out to look for an insurance? Or I guess there are many cases, especially in the insurance sector as well, where with embedded insurance, they're only really starting to use the insurance, like previously maybe not even using the insurance because it was too much hassle or they couldn't even find the insurance product. Quite keen to understand how your typical kind of customers were dealing with insurances before this solution.
Yeah, so right now, a vast majority, I would say, of the horses in Europe and around the world have no insurance at all. And there are various reasons for that. There are certain people where you hit, if you own enough horses, perhaps self-insurance is a model that works for you. But also, horse insurance can be difficult to obtain. It can be quite expensive for a lot of people. And so this was something that we were eager to tackle. When we look at our company, our focus is to try and distribute data to enable people to reduce the amount of paperwork they're having to do. Our thought process is, if we hold the data here, why should you be filling it out on another piece of software somewhere else? Why not instead, can we not partner with various people, like in the insurance sector, where we can pass your data along and enable to reduce some of that administrative burden? So that was the thought process with us. So what happens now with our solution is you log on to our platform. We have an insurance tab. So we have various tabs, a home tab, a horse tab, a treatments tab. There's now an insurance tab. You click on that, selects the horses you want to insure. And then thanks to the embedded Kayna solution, you're brought immediately through to the Affinity product of WTW, where you can procure insurance. And as much as we can, data is passed through so that you can reduce the amount of information you need to input when you're procuring your insurance.
Understood. And is it like various kind of insurances, or what are the actual insurance products that the person can use?
So at the moment, we've started with mortality insurance. Perhaps later on, I could talk about my dreams of where we might go in the future. But I think it's always best to start with one thing and try and get that as good as possible. And then you can start building upon that foundational block. So it is mortality insurance at the moment.
Understood. And then maybe, Paul, coming to you, I mean, Finlay described already the data that is flowing from his system to your system and then maybe to WTW. Again, the data about horses might be something like very specific, not the one maybe comparable to, let's say, consumer or normal kind of like business insurances. Was it a huge change for you where you had to adapt to this kind of specific use case?
No, not particularly. The way that we've built our system is, as I mentioned earlier, we're pretty much insurance line agnostic. And our job is to be completely optimized to take the data, obviously all consent driven, but take the data as it's provided to us. And our job is really to get that data to Anthony and the team at WTW and the insurance ecosystem. So whether it's a construction company's revenue or if it's an age of a horse, it's data to us. So we're able to get these things done in a very optimized way. So we understand, obviously, we're software folks. We've been doing insurtech for 20 years. We understand the challenges of bringing stuff into the insurance ecosystem at the back end. There's lots and lots of nuances there. But really at the front end, that's where we're completely focused to make it easy for platforms to plug in and embed it. Instead of a 6 to 9 month program, it's a week. You can just plug in a widget or a workflow and away you go. So no, it really is irrelevant to us what type of data that we're moving around, if you like.
Interesting.
I might jump in quickly because Paul has mentioned a very important point to our customers, which is the trust and the ability for them to control their data. The data we're dealing with, especially with horse trainers, this medical data is very personal to them and their organization. This is something that a lot of the time they regard somewhat as their secret sauce in terms of the way that they treat certain horses and their training methods. So it's a key factor of being successful in our industry has been to build a trust with those trainers that they know that their data isn't going anywhere without their consent, but also making their lives easy by allowing them, when they so wish, to move that data around to our various partners.
Interesting point. And I haven't really thought about that, but it makes a lot of sense that this data is probably the secret source and very important to them. And Finlay, you did mention already a little bit, like, I mean, I want to ask you about the type of insurances that you have some ideas for the future. Maybe we can go a little bit into that. And also, I still find it quite interesting. I mean, very often I worked on not in the insurance sector, but in the banking, embedded fintech world, on the infrastructure provider side. So very often kind of in Paul's shoes on the embedded fintech side and going out and trying to convince everybody, hey, you should be considering banking and payments and all these kind of things. From what I understood is that you, Finlay, with your company, you kind of realize that insurance is something that should be going into, and you, I think, probably found Kayna, and this is how the whole discussion started. So it looks like the insurance piece is quite a piece that was born out of your thinking. So quite keen to dive a little bit more how you see that evolve over the next years.
Well, it was certainly something that we were searching for an insurance partner for some time. I think this has all grown and developed through the partnerships that we've made here in terms of finding out the art of the possible and what we can do now. But I'd certainly have a love for what might be possible in the future. One of the things I worry about is if you're talking purely from a financial perspective, horses are a very, very volatile asset. Because if you have a racehorse, once you buy the horse, it starts at a certain price. If it wins a race or loses a race, its value immediately is hopping around. So in future, one of the things I would love to do is to start integrating some of that data. So if a horse wins a race, immediately, if your horse was insured before the race and you win, it's underinsured now. So that is a trigger point to reach out to customers and say, okay, your horse just became more valuable. Have you considered upping your insurance? And that's probably something our customers aren't considering right now, but it's an immediate trigger point for future insurance. I'd love to see us diversify our product offering, but I think we've definitely got enough that we've bitten off to start with the mortality insurance, but there are other types of horse insurance that definitely we would love to improve the offering on. But for me, I think there's a major point around volatility, and that's an immediate point where I could see us providing more value in the future. As well as I'd love to get into the area of micro insurance for if your horse is traveling or et cetera. I think that is many years potentially in the future, but there are just so many ways to expand what we've started. And I'm very excited to be what I view it at the start of this journey as we move forward with the partners we built.
And I get what you say, Finlay. In a way, obviously, as you said, your customers using your software haven't been not many as I maybe used even insurance product. Now you're introducing a new solution. Then it's also a journey, right? I think there's no benefit as well to jumping immediately into the perfect solution when you probably need your customers also to adopt and understand them exactly what they want and how the solution can fit into that. And Anthony, I want to come back to you. And obviously, we heard from Finlay now, the specific embedded insurance solution and how his customers looking and feeling about this. Maybe from let's say, and with your team, you obviously just described doing a lot of the embedded insurance partnership and going after partners who are not really the typical insurance companies. What broader developments do you see happening around there? And are there specific, maybe not sectors, but specific points you kind of keep close eye on because you think they're quite relevant for embedded insurance in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I'll come back to the example because it's a really poignant one. The example on the state of the market for small businesses, micro businesses particularly, where they only have up to, say, 10 employees and a small turnover. In the UK, they represent 99% of all businesses in terms of volume, okay? They employ 60% of the private sector workforce. So it's really important that those businesses are supported so they may remain viable. And 50% of the private sector turnover is actually coming from those small businesses. It's really important that we have an economy that thrives and an economy that grows. So that, to a certain extent, is offering insurance. Now, back to the earlier points that we made, the challenges are for a small business owner who might be the only person in a business to start off with. They don't have what a large corporate enterprise has. They don't have a risk management function. They don't have someone with the experience of managing risk. So they're an expert in their own field, whether that's a horse trainer, whether that's a small retail shop owner. And all of the while, over the last sort of few years, as Paul's mentioned, we've seen this abundance of new vertical SaaS organizations that are doing some amazing things in their field, and they're supporting the everyday backbone of those businesses, and the owners actually manage their businesses more effectively. And their platforms contain data. And so if we can, for our part in the insurance industry, working with Paul, identify the problem statements that involve a huge number of small businesses, and then use data at a convenient point to offer more tailored insurance and be able to flag where risk profiles might change. For example, I might start a business on January the 1st. I might get some basic level of commercial combined insurance, but I might take on my first employee halfway through my insured year and not realize that I don't have any employee liability cover on my policy. I'm therefore underinsured. But if the vertical SaaS platform has a payroll functionality and I activate that for the first time halfway through the year, I can send an alert to my insured customer to say, we value that you're expanding your business. We're here to support you. And by the way, you might need to address the different profile that you have in terms of your risk, and we can help you with that. And I think if we join the dots and solve problems that are abundantly rife in the market, that helps us offer and design products that meet the customer's needs at the right time, whilst they do offer fair value. And that cuts across different sectors as well. We've referred to marketplaces, but also franchise businesses, Lars. If you imagine large franchise retail brands, they have thousands of franchisees, and those franchisees have to attest every year that they've got the prerequisite level of insurance to the franchisor. Now, that process can be quite cumbersome, quite laborious for both parties. And in essence, working with Kayna, we can make that attestation process effectively very slick, very simple, and whilst offering optionality for a franchisee to purchase the preferred franchise insurance that's been designed for their needs.
I think that's a really good point. I think compliance-driven embedded insurance is very interesting. If you look at the construction sector, when you've got thousands of subcontractors on a platform, a lot of platforms are saying, we know they have the right training, the right certification, and they sent us in a proof of insurance on January 1st. 20% of subcontractors in a lot of markets cancel before the end of the year to save money. So people are saying this carpenter is okay to go on site, or this locum going into a dental practice is okay, but they're not. So if you launch an embedded insurance program, you know exactly the status of their insurance, or if they've made any changes, et cetera, et cetera. So there's lots of really interesting nuances kind of emerging in embedded. It's not just let's make some money out of embedded insurance. There's much more to it than that.
Obviously, I guess like with all the things, I mean, maybe for every product, but specifically in the embedded finance world, it all starts with a customer value. We just did a webinar earlier this morning where we spoke about this exactly as well. It's like nobody, not even us, are going to use a product just because it's embedded finance. There has to be like some actual customer value. But Paul, to continue on that, I mean, you mentioned earlier as well that embedded insurance is, or insurance, we agreed on, is maybe a few years behind the banking or fintech development. Is there something specific that you are seeing happening maybe more on the fintech side that you also believe will also happen on the insurance side, or are you seeing like some kind of like practical examples for that comparison?
Yeah, we see a huge, like we work alongside a lot of different embedded fintech folks. We sell in and partner with a lot of the same people on the platform side. You know, and the stories they tell is that the back end infrastructure really wasn't there. And we see massive digitization at the back end of the insurance world. Still some way to go. So, and that's really the journey that I was at a UBS conference in London 2 weeks ago, and they were all kind of laughing at, this is where we were 5 years ago. Remember how tough that was? And I'm going, well, yeah, that's insurance. But we're catching up. And you see a lot of carriers, a lot of brokers kind of building API capabilities, which is going to make our job at the front end deliver. But as well, it's look, at the end of the day, none of this is in isolation. It's all about, does this matter? We're the technology guys, and we look to very smart insurance people and say, do they care? And there's a huge interest in embedded. I mean, I think the CEO of Hiscox, Aki Hussein, said 15% of their P&C business in Europe is going to be embedded in 5 years' time. That's just a colossal amount of insurance for that one insurer. And obviously, they're very focused in the SMB sector. So I think one question really is why now? Why now is the infrastructure, the back end is catching up with the demand. We find that talking to software platforms, everybody starts with, let's do payments. They start with payments and then they go, that's fantastic. We're making money. It's a great customer experience. And then they look at, will we embed banking and payroll and accountancy services, and insurance is in that stack as well. And the take-up rate really has been relatively low, primarily, and the reason is quite simple. For a fast-moving software company to integrate with a very large insurance organization takes a long time. So, and that's why we make it easier for both partners to launch these programs. So it's a week's work. It's not 6-9 months work. So that's pretty interesting. And the other piece of the puzzle is the software platforms, when it comes to insurance, is very different than, say, payments. Payments work so it doesn't today. Insurance, you want to work with somebody who's been here for 100 years and will be here for another 100 years, not a new kid on the block who might have great tech, but they really understand this vertical. So if you take Willis Towers Watson, if you take Markel, they really understand equine insurance. That's who you want to partner with. So people want the best of both worlds. They want the very safe, solid insurance organization that's good for their customers, but a really fast-moving tech. So that's why WTW and Kayna together, I think, is a really good partnership. So software platforms seem to like a lot.
Paul, I think that was a great summary to put this all together. I totally agree with you from my understanding, totally agree with you that obviously in a lot of embedded finance areas, sometimes there's a new kid on the block, as you said, and it provides a perfect solution. But especially when it comes to insurance, which is basically protection in the case when things go wrong, you probably want to work with somebody who is also then able to protect you properly. And that might be more somebody with a brand that has been around for a very long time.
Well, Paul mentioned working with a brand that might have been around for 100 years. Just for the avoidance of doubt, I haven't been, but certainly WTW has. I may look like I've been.
Awesome. Thank you, Finlay. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Anthony, for all the insights. Thanks for sharing all of this. For me, it was quite an interesting journey and learning. Paul, I think we connected a couple of months or maybe a year or 2 years ago, spoke about a couple of cases, and I think this one was a quite fitting one to bring to the audience. So thank you for joining. If there's any more comments you want to add, please feel free to do so. And maybe you also want to drop, maybe each of you, some information how people can get in touch with you if there's any more interest from the audience out there.
Sure. Delighted. Thanks, Lars.
Thanks ever so much for having us, Lars.
Thanks, Lars. I'll kick off by saying if you are looking for equine insurance, you can go to www.equinemedirecord.com and you can sign up and kick on from there. At the moment, we've just launched in the UK to start. So I would invite UK customers to sign up there if you're interested.
I'm quite keen to see how many of my listeners are racehorse owners in the UK. But who knows? Paul, how about Kayna? What's a good way to get in touch with you?
I'm very active on LinkedIn. So Paul Prendergast on LinkedIn, just reach out or go to, so it's paul@kayna.io is my email. So delighted to have a chat. Big fan of networking. Do a lot of conferences. So traveling around. I'm off to Vegas on Sunday to ITC. So anybody going there, it'd be great to say hi.
Awesome. Thank you. Anthony?
And with regard to WTW GB Affinity, visit the WTW site looking for GB Affinity. We have a lot of information there about the solutions that we offer. For those that are considering an embedded insurance program or looking for solutions, I'd also like to add is between Paul and ourselves, we developed and published a white paper earlier on this year, which is all about vertical SaaS relating to UK SMEs. And it provides market context about the challenge with underinsurance in the market for other vertical SaaS providers that support that market. And it's available free to download.
Awesome. I'll link it in the show notes. So anybody listening here can look in the Spotify, Apple podcast or YouTube show notes to find that paper. Thank you again from my side. And until next time.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you like this episode, please make sure to follow my podcast and subscribe to my newsletter. Visit embeddedfinancereview.com for more. Thank you. Until next time.